Thanks, Matt. So, yeah, Matt gave a quick intro about OT, or operational technology. My view is much of the cybersecurity dialogue to date has really been focused on protecting information technology and data. And we hear about, how do we ensure cyber actors don't steal data, don't steal intellectual property, don't steal, trade and government secrets. And that's really important for both national security and economic security. But one thing that often gets short shrift is, what about operational technology? What about those cyber threats that can actually, kill you? Not to be overly dramatic, but it's true. Cyber actors who penetrate operational technology systems can manipulate things like water treatment facilities, pipelines, power grids, air traffic controller, things of that like, and wreak havoc. And this is not hypothetical. This is, we've seen just in recent months testimony on the Hill from the FBI director and other cybersecurity government leaders that, China is pre-positioning themselves inside critical infrastructure sectors here in the United States. And the director's statement, clearly this is not for military or political targets, but they're positioning themselves to, in the event of a conflict, target civilians. So pretty scary stuff. And just recently, I see Jake Sullivan, an EPA administrator, sent out a letter to all the governors warning them of cyber actors targeting water treatment facilities, drinking water, wastewater, and the like. It's becoming a bigger topic on a national scale now as well. And the chair of the committee to which the FBI director was testifying, the Select Committee on Competition with China, Congressman Mike Gallagher, said, I'm going to read this quote: "There's no economic benefit for these actions. There's no intelligence gathering rationale. This is the cyberspace equivalent of placing bombs on American bridges, water treatment facilities, and power plants." So again, pretty dramatic statement from him too. And hopefully we as a nation are sitting up and taking notice about really the need to focus on operational technology, cybersecurity, and not just IT. So with that, we've got a great panel of folks here, a wide variety of experiences. And why don't we turn over to the panel? I'll start with Michele, from Southern Company, utility company. And how about from your perspective as in both an owner and operator of OT systems, what's the difference between OT and IT, just to clarify? All right, why don't we call an audible now while you try and get that to work. Hey, Madison, is that something you? Okay, so Madison hopefully will work with Michele on that. So why don't we jump ahead to Eric? When we talk about, we'll circle back to what's the differentiator between OT and IT, and the perspective of a utility company, for example, who lives in both those worlds. From your perspective, why is OT harder to secure than IT?
One of the biggest reasons is because a lot of this infrastructure was put in place years, or in some cases even decades, before we really were thinking carefully about cybersecurity. You see a lot of utilities modernizing, quote unquote, to these digital systems that allow for more automation. It's better for them in some ways because it can be more affordable. It requires fewer people. You see this a lot in the water sector. But a lot of these systems, despite being digital and perhaps shiny and sleek in certain ways, they were not designed with security in mind. And so we're putting a lot of this infrastructure in place without really thinking about how it, first of all, how it connects, how it interacts, but then also how it might be exposed to the internet, how it might contain vulnerabilities. And depending on the assets we're talking about here, think about space infrastructure, for example. And that's just one example on the extreme end, but there are others as well. It's not always easy to go out to the system and fix it, apply a patch, plug in a flash drive and install a software update. It's not like a computer sitting on your desk. In some cases, you're talking about a monitoring sensor somewhere out in the field on a pipeline, or God forbid, an actual satellite in space. So the difficulty of reaching the infrastructure, the fact that a lot of it predates our modern understanding of cybersecurity, these are just a couple of things that make it very challenging.
Yeah, good point. I think there's a lot of parallels as well to the need going forward to really implement secure by design. I mean, a lot of this old technology has been in place for a while. As you said, it's not a computer, but if you consider the security aspect right from the get-go, it's going to be a lot easier to secure it going forward. So we're playing catch-up mode right here, but this really, in my view, really underscores the importance of the point to really focus on secure by design right from the get-go as you put in new systems, whether they're IT or OT. So Frank, we've got actors targeting, position themselves in the infrastructure, and the biggest concern are nation state actors like China in particular. So when it comes to securing OT systems, from your view, what unique challenges are posed to those that have to secure these systems that are under attack by nation states?
Well, thank you, John. And I wanted to footstop Mike Gallagher's bold and very forward-leaning statement. It is the cyber equivalent of placing bombs on our bridges and power plants. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, what differentiates nation states are intentions. What are their intentions? What are their capabilities? The fact that they're pre-positioning and pre-posturing around OT systems, it's pretty clear it's aimed at denigrating or degrading our capability to deploy power, deploy forces, project power, and the like. It can be tactical in nature or strategic in nature. Another big differentiator, in addition to motive, is obviously resources. Nation states can bring all source intelligence collection to this challenge to include cyber means, but also a wide range of other technical and exquisite capabilities that can be brought to bear in addition to human intelligence. And clearly, when you're looking at a nation state actor, that has to be front and center. So bottom line, we discussed the Communist Party of China and some of their intentions. They've made very clear what their intentions are. And I think to one extent or another, are even signaling what some of their capabilities are. So this is not science fiction. We've seen the ability for cyber incidents to have kinetic and physical impact and effect. And bottom line here is China's not alone. Outside of maybe North Korea, most are not in it for the financial motive. They're in it to enhance their project power and enhance their military and tactical capabilities.
And what a total shock. China says the U.S. is being overly dramatic about this. And
surprise, surprise.
Yeah, shocker. So we talk about the impact of these cyber actors being in critical infrastructure. Let's look at a real world scenario, through from a military perspective and specifically Indo-PACOM. What advantages could China have in leveraging malware that's buried in critical infrastructure, and a place like Guam, for example, which actually did happen a year ago. So Alison, look for your thoughts on that.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so this was a really big deal. It sent shockwaves through the national security community in DC and around the globe. So the military, what a lot of people don't realize or appreciate is that we are in over 70 countries and we have over 800 installations. So that is a significant footprint. And these installations, some are more strategic and more important than others. Guam is essential to our presence in the Indo-PACOM. If something were to happen with Taiwan, there's no surprise that we would leverage the 3 bases and the 4 deployed systems and ships and aircraft that we have there as a response. And so it's very unsettling, and by many accounts, that malicious code had been buried there for years. We just are now really understanding the full extent. It very much is the tip of the iceberg, and it puts us in a position where we need to get serious about how we respond, not just across our military bases, but our larger OT, because everything really is a strategic target at this point. And we know in the past that the Chinese have leveraged cyberspace to achieve espionage, intellectual property theft objectives, but now they're in a position where they can really hold us at risk, and it becomes a huge health and safety issue. And as it applies to the military, our ability to project power is essential. And so, it's just so much cleaner for the Chinese or the CCP in this instance to be able to delay or deny a response than to go kinetic on the battlefield. They can also then leverage, plausible deniability, because was it really us that did that? Or, do you just not really, take care of your systems and you need to cyber up? And so one of the things that I think lawmakers and policymakers need to consider is what we've done before is not going to be sufficient moving forward. And that while, the authority to operate, which is widely used, needs to be amplified for continuous ATO across our critical infrastructure. Also, the DoD really needs to get serious. Hopefully with this new office that they have in OSD, they'll be in a better position where they can really tackle many of their NDA requirements that mandates that they map out all of their critical infrastructure. That still needs to be done.
Yeah, and you raise a good point that even being in these and buried inside or pre-positioned in critical infrastructure, they don't necessarily have to go to the the doomsday scenario and shut things down. Just by tweaking some systems, or you can the net effect is reduce morale of the users, insert mistrust and system reliance and things. So there's a whole range of positive things the cyber actor could do, for the benefit of their government and all these systems. So, Frank, one of the things when we talk cybersecurity, oh, we got Michele back on. Can we hear you? Nope, we don't hear you. Wow. Okay. Well, let's jump over to you, Frank. On when we talk cybersecurity, many folks say threat intelligence is the driver. So to help you prioritize and where you put your resources and how do you defend and so on. So from your perspective, how can organizations really effectively collaborate and share threat intel related to OT cybersecurity threats, particularly across sectors and government agencies?
Awesome. Well, John, one thing I wish Michele were on, because I think the world between IT and OT has converged dramatically, and you need visibility across both your IT and OT systems. Very different communities grew up with different priorities, safety versus security, and quite honestly, the emphasis in our world, and I say this collectively with all of us on this video today and probably the majority watching, we grew up with that IT mindset, and there have been a number of initiatives that have been kicked off to facilitate and foster sharing of information vis-a-vis government and industry in the IT space. Normally, you bring up the word public-private partnership and information sharing, and you're going to see me roll my eyes and roll them pretty far, because we've been talking about this for decades. But when it comes to the OT environment in particular, they haven't really had a seat at the table. And they really do need to be pulled into this effort, because again, I have a hard time delineating with cloud enabling some of these capabilities on the OT environment and IIoT and the like, delineating the difference between the two. So I do think there's an opportunity here to kick off another initiative. I would like to think if Uncle Sam ever had a tidbit of information that could lead to a significant attack, they'll signal it one way or another. But the truth is you want these partnerships in place before the bomb goes off, before the incident occurs, before the balloon goes up. Because all things said and done, what makes these initiatives work, the few that are successful, is trust. And trust takes a whole long time to build, and it can evaporate in nanoseconds. So I think here there are some partnership opportunities. John, I think you brought it up, or maybe Ali, you did, Secure by Design. CISA's got a great effort there, but there's another government initiative that I was part of, and that was Cyber Informed Engineering, which was an OT emphasis coming out of the Department of Energy. Those two should come together. So government should lead by example, maybe start integrating some of its efforts, and then be able to hit that Pillsbury Doughboy in the belly button to be able to share the information with the private sector. So normally I would say the last thing we need is another public-private partnership, but when it comes to OT, I think we do.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I think it's my camera, but go ahead. I wanted just to check that.
Is it hike vision, Michele?
I'm not really sure. My apologies. But would you like, you asked me a question in the beginning. Would you like me to go back to that, or do you want?
Why don't we circle back to that? We'll just imagine your face up on the screen then, so
Oh, yes.
you can hear your smart voice. So really, just to lay the foundation here, the difference between OT and IT from your perspective as a utility company.
Oh, great, and thank you for having me, and my apologies. So this question can be answered in many different ways. And when I was thinking about it from a general perspective, and I'm sure many on this call can relate, information technology encompasses tools and processes used to manage data. So it could be network, it could be cloud, internet, operational technology. It's the integration of hardware and software dedicated to monitoring and controlling these physical devices and the processes. So for us in the energy sector, you would look at industrial control systems like ICS and supervisory control and data acquisition like SCADA systems. But when I really started thinking about all the conversations that were taking place today and what I wanted to talk about, I really wanted to point out the longevity of the assets that OT supports. For the energy sector, our life cycle is very long. It's 30 to 50 years. So when we're looking at devices supporting today's energy infrastructure, they weren't a part of the original design. So we're adding in devices to increase efficiency and reliability. And this has been taking place over the last 20 to 30 years. And it's required its asset owners and operators to connect OT to IT systems to monitor and control functions. So like today's conversation, all of what you were just talking about, I mean, that's the environment that we're in today. And when we're looking at that and taking into consideration what's taken place over, the last decades, I'm not sure that threat landscape was part of the original design. And so secure by design, fine for some, not for all. And then merging the IT and OT together. I mean, asset owners and operators in our sector, they're making redesigns, they're putting in security, they're updating the processes, they're understanding this connectivity. But the assumption is the asset is going to be there for 30 years. And when you're looking at IT systems, they're continuously changing. So what's, the conundrum there, and how are we going to blend, and how are we going to look at that risk? And there is a physical risk, an impact from the OT perspective for safety and control functions that could cause physical destruction to an energy asset that would not necessarily be just from an IT system attack. So that was what my opening statement was going to be. Again, apologies.
No, that's great. We're glad we got you connected in here even without your face. But great perspective from where you sit. And I totally agree with your statement, Frank, in terms of some of the convergence we're seeing with IT and OT. Granted, a lot of the OT assets are, their life cycle is much longer than we may use for IT assets. But one of the things that concerns me with OT, and I'll harken back to my time at NSA, back in the 2016-17 timeframe in there when the NotPetya attack took place. And I grew up in the Intel world. When there's a crisis, there's a system in place for everybody across the government to get together to share. Here's what's going on right now, on a really quick turnaround basis. Well, in NotPetya, I saw a similar thing happen in the cybersecurity world. There really was no time-sensitive way to collaborate across different entities, private sector and the government, to pass information. Here's what we know now. Here's what we've learned. Here's what's happening. And that's traditional crisis response. And I think that's something we need to think about in the OT sectors as well, particularly because, and I'm not an expert, but I've heard this reference that a lot of the technology you see in OT is common across different sectors. So if you have an attack in one sector, how does the other sector learn from that and say, okay, here's a vector that the actor went after. Here's how I can button up my own OT systems to prevent, such a thing from happening in my realm. So it really comes back to, it's information sharing is so critical on so many levels. And it's not just public-private, but cross-sector, collaboration as well. So that's kind of the panelists' thoughts on from an operations perspective. Let's slide into policy perspective. So Michele, why don't you start us off here? What policy issues should we be focusing on to improve OT cybersecurity?
So one of the big things that through the commission and Cyberspace Solarium Commission and the work that Tom Fanning has led, whether through the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, with standing up the tri-sector, or his time as the CISA Cybersecurity Advisory Committee, is, what is the reimagine of the public-private partnership? And, the policy to support that. I think we've been looking at, the hierarchy of the systemically important entities, which started off as systemically important critical infrastructure. We called it SICI. But, what are the benefits and the burdens? So, how can we come to, how does critical infrastructure is 87% owned and operated for the United States at the table today, now, with the federal government, state and local, like Frank has been stating all day, and tribal. Like, what is that discussion and how are we working together? I know that many on here have talked about information sharing. I would say information exchange, policy to support the joint collaboration environment in the energy sector. We're in pilot for the Energy Threat Analysis Center, and in Denver, Colorado, there is 4 industry owners and operators working with DOE, National Labs, DOE Intel, and our ISAC in support of all hazards. It's cyber, but it's IT, OT, and then all threats. But there really isn't any policy that is current that supports this type of information exchange, data privacy, and also the authorities that are needed for liability protection and others. So it's for, getting together and having people sit in a room is one thing, but then having the structure, the policy, the legislation to support that type of environment, we're not there yet. And, I think it's one of those things that if we're really going to address systemic risk and cascading impacts, and it's a partnership between public and private at a variety of different levels within the government, it just we need policy that supports having that level of exchange.
Do you think any of the national cybersecurity strategy, their implementation plan, will any of those improve in this area?
Yes, I mean, I think when you're looking at it, so one of the things is, I think you're talking about the National Cyber Security Implementation Plan. Yeah. We've been working with, one of the tasks is for collaboration centers, and I think they're trying to understand the best practices. Energy is not the only sector that's standing up a center like this, but the convening authorities, getting people, I think we've got to move past just best practices and get the policies in the right place and have the conversation from a different perspective. There's just so much to learn. And then this also is, we call it the ETAC spoke to the hub. And when we say hub, we mean JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defensive Collective. What does this mean? And then how are we going to be talking and sharing information to that level? I'm not sure we're exactly there yet. I don't think policy is the complete stumbling block, but that may give more momentum to the cause.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Eric. So why do you think government support for OT cybersecurity has been so inconsistent to date?
I mean, it starts with policymakers, right? So few people in Congress, I would say, understand why OT is so different from IT, why it needs different kinds of support. When you look at, again, I go back to the water sector, but there are others like food and agriculture. These utilities, these operators, these farmers, they don't have a lot of money for cybersecurity. If you're a water operator, you're going to spend that money on treatment chemicals. You're not going to spend it on multi-factor authentication. Policymakers haven't realized yet that if they want these outcomes in these ginormous industries, they're going to have to put some money behind it, not just new standards, not just regulations, which, you know, many folks do believe are appropriate. These are people who are making money off of providing services to the American people. They should be held accountable for how they do that. But it's just a basic fact that you can put in place all the common sense rules you want. If they don't have the money to implement them, it won't get done. And it's not because they don't want to do it. It's not because they don't think they should have to do it. It's because they can't do it. So money is a huge factor. But the government is also, as we've heard on this call already, not super well organized when it comes to what agency is going to provide what kinds of support, right? So I mentioned food and agriculture. The agency that's supposed to help those farmers and those, you know, rural agricultural collectives with making sure that their food isn't poisoned or their tractors aren't hacked is the agriculture department, which has never known any cybersecurity responsibility, has never thought of itself as a cybersecurity support service. And so what you're seeing now is a recognition from CISA that they need to do a better job of working with these agencies that have never really prioritized cybersecurity, but we're still kind of in those early stages. So I would say those are the two biggest things. It's the money, but it's also the understanding from folks in the government of what's the best way that we can all play these roles and not overlap, but also not leave gaps where nobody is pitching in.
I was smiling when you're talking about, you know, entities that aren't used to playing in this game. I call that the oh shit syndrome. Like, oh crap, you know, I need to look at this now too, because it does apply to everybody. I mean, it's in the cybersecurity world, a lot of people say, well, nobody really cares about it until nobody cares about my data until it's taken. And then, you know, it becomes a very important thing. So let's talk about pipelines a bit. You know, we've known pipelines have had vulnerabilities for quite a while, even prior to the ransomware incident with Colonial Pipeline. So, Ali, from where you sit, why do you think? What are your thoughts on the you know, TSA's process, the regulatory process? You know, given that there's such a serious threat there to the pipelines.
Sure. Just want to make sure I do a quick sound check.
You're good.
All right, wonderful. Okay, yeah. So, you know, it started off a little rocky and people had their doubts initially because they kind of came out of the gate and it was widely criticized for being too vague and overly prescriptive. I recall one of the mandates required patching vulnerabilities, which, okay, I understand, but you can accomplish that through network segmentation and access control policies. And then there was like another mandate that, you know, really had people scratching their heads where they were focused on securing IT systems using antivirus software, which isn't always effective for OT networks. And so I think we're in a better place. We're on the third iteration of it. It continues to evolve. It is executable. It also keeps in mind as well, like the continuity of services is essential to whatever we do put in place. And so we have folks really focusing on foundational capabilities such as visibility, risk assessment, threat detection, and response capabilities and processes. So this is performance-based outcomes, and it's much more effective than prescriptive check-the-box exercises that really gets us nowhere. And so I'm just happy to see that this is headed in the right direction and that the TSA is in a position working with critical owners and operators to develop and approve cybersecurity implementation plans. Incident response plans are also moving forward. There's also in the works assessment program, and then of course we'll be in a position where TSA can review and approve the cybersecurity assessment plan for different folks. And so I think that, puts us in a better position, a better posture for us to understand what's currently going on and to be able to work with the regulators in a manner that ensures that there aren't critical disruptions moving forward. I mean, this is, I consider initially, and it's not over. There's no, end to this. It's a continuum, but almost like a best case scenario that I hope that others, to include FDA and some of the more less mature EPA potential regulators, are kind of looking at this and saying, okay, how can we make this work for our sector?
Okay, thanks, Allie. So speaking of updating plans and the like, let's talk about PBD 21 for a second. 11 years old now at this point, being updated. I did learn earlier in this session that space is not going to be included as a sector, which I, like Admiral Montgomery, am disappointed about that. I think that really ought to be a sector. So I know you got feelings on this as well, Frank, but what about cloud? What do you think about cloud being identified as a sector? And frankly, I don't know if cloud's going to be identified as a new sector or not.
I can't refrain from jumping into the space discussion, because Mark and I did lead an effort around designating space a critical infrastructure sector. And quite honestly, our economy and our way of life is so dependent upon positioning, navigation, timing. Clocks rule the world. I don't want to bore people with that, but you manipulate a nanosecond, you can have huge implications that can cause kinetic effect as well as massive economic benefits. So the fact that space is not going to be designated, I think, is a hugely missed opportunity. And no one is suggesting that the Title 10, Title 50 equities at DOD and IC would be messed around with. Quite the opposite. Civilian space is taking off, no pun intended. Regarding cloud, that's another, everything is migrating to the cloud. So I think that is another set of issues. Can it be sort of a cross-cutting theme that addresses everything? Yes, no. I think the cloud has to be. It's not what I want to choose. It's where reality is, where we are turning. So if we miss out on both space and cloud for a document that should be regularly updated, but since the last one wasn't since 2013, shame on us, because we're inevitably going to see an incident of one sort or another. So I'm not ready to give up on this one. I hope Mark didn't. I missed his session, so I hope he didn't cede the territory there.
He was just as disappointed as you are right here, and many of us, I think. So we've just got a few minutes here. Why don't I just run around the horn here and ask for anybody's final thoughts on this OT cybersecurity issue. Why don't we start with Michele?
So I guess, with listening to everything today, it's about risk. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity to be proactive versus reactive, and not have to wait for the next event to have this discussion, to understand within your company, to understand within your sector or cross-sector the systemic risk and cascading impacts, and what does that work force look like to support, do we have the right people around the table to even in the last session they were talking about those that can interpret. I think that's very important from the business perspective, and we also may need to have that interpreter also when we're working with the government. That's my final, and I'm sorry again.
Yeah, that's all right. That's cool. Eric?
I would say, what I'm tracking and watching as we go forward is whether we start to see better understanding of OT cybersecurity issues on the Hill, how that translates to policy. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission got a lot done, but most of it was focused on government organization and IT. not so much of a heavy focus on OT. Understandably, we had some lower hanging fruit first. But when I talk to my sources, there's a lot of confusion about when is Congress going to pick up the ball on OT, and particularly when are we going to start to see, an infrastructure bill for cyber? When are we going to start to see cash infusions to the water sector, the healthcare sector? I think the Change Healthcare hack has really got a lot of people paying attention to this issue for the first time or in a new way. So that's what I'm going to be watching, is when do we start to see that recognition from policymakers that they can't just leave this to the agencies with existing authorities, that there actually needs to be some new policy and new funding put in place here.
Great point. Thanks, Eric. Allie?
Excuse me. Sure. So I'm focused on the notice of rulemaking that CISA's due to release. It should have come out on March 15th, but I'm told that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for incident report for covered entities. So that's going to be your critical infrastructure owners and operators. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops too. I really am optimistic that they will genuinely look to incorporate a lot of the best practices and forward-leaning requirements that industry is already doing now, and also be sensitive to reporting regulations that already exist in heartburn at the state level. Elections have consequences. So what you're seeing right now is the Biden administration moving very quickly to try and kind of get everything into place. I predict that if we have another Biden administration, the regulatory tempo will continue. Just as a quick, data point, at this point in time, compared to the Obama administration, regulation in general has gone up 69% in the Biden administration. So we'll continue to see that moving forward. If we have a Trump administration, it's very hard to predict because he's unpredictable, but those things will be on the table again, because very few things were passed through the Congress. A lot of it was EOs and rulemaking, and so we'll have to kind of sit tight and see what happens. But one thing that we do know is that we are vulnerable, and that kind of waiting around for good policy to roll downhill or regulations to come and be enforced is not the right answer. We really do need to take a more proactive approach, as Michele had said.
All right, thanks, Allie. Hey, Frank, we're bumping up against time here, so real quick, final thoughts.
Never had an unspoken thought. What's old is new is old again. So I think lots of great points here. Let me just make one point, and that is government tends to look at the world through its own boxes and org charts, not how the world is organized. We can't afford to do this in the IT/OT environment because the two have converged a long time ago. And we need to figure out how to get the SRMAs, or the sector risk management agencies, and the authorities in sync here. So bottom line is, it was first recognized in the national strategy that Chris Inglis and Kemba Walden released recently through the National Cyber Director, but ultimately Eric's right. Where is Congress? And we will see. I want to make one pitch for Idaho National Lab. They do have a good OT Defender pilot program that I think can maybe make some waves going forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And I'll just, earlier in the summit, there was mention of, what's next? What do we need to be worried about? From my perspective, this certainly is in that realm. All it's going to take is one significant OT attack to make everybody stand up and take notice. And I don't think we're really, as a nation, thinking of those terms yet. So over to you, Suzanne.
Agreed. John, thank you so much for leading such a fantastic conversation. Frank, Alison, Michele, I'm sorry we only got to see you briefly. Eric, thank you so much. I feel like a lot of us have a much better understanding of the issues ahead and the OT vulnerabilities and needs that needs to be addressed. So thank you again, appreciate it.